Hi, my name is Renata. I am this parenting talk show, Talking with Renata host. And the show is meant for parents. It's more about parents than it is about kids, because it has this purpose of reminding us what's really essential in parenthood, and that is our own mental health. The show is also meant to bring more awareness about what's happening behind the scenes in our houses, and to know that we're not alone. So we gather once a week to have those meaningful discussions about what's happening in our families, how we deal with it, and then we share these discussions with you, our dear listeners. And I'm so excited to introduce you to our today's guest in just a few seconds. Hi, welcome to everyone. I'm so excited to be here today with Jessica Joelle Alexander. Let me introduce her to you briefly. So Jessica is a best-selling author, Danish parenting expert, columnist, speaker, and cultural researcher. The Danish Way of Parenting, her book, is one of my most sold parenting books of all time. It was also translated into Lithuanian under the name of Vaikų auklėjimas pagal danus. Jessica is a spokesperson for Lego on the Power of Play and gives talks on parenting, education, and well-being around the world. She's also a regular columnist for the Copenhagen Post and currently researches and writes for UC Berkley's Wellbeing and Belonging Institute. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me.
I was so intrigued by the last part of your bio about this Wellbeing and Belonging Institute. Mm-hmm. Does it do any research into parenting about, children and parents' relationship?
I'm not sure if they specialize in parenting. I actually wrote a paper about education and empathy and bullying, and so I think they're open, but they especially focus on belonging and othering and things like that. So I think if the angle fits, possibly, but it's a broad.
Yes, I get it, because I often find those topics in parenting too. Like there is one child in the family that's just different from all the other members of family, and you don't have these feelings of belonging. You feel just other. You feel different. Mm-hmm. That's why my question. But let's go back to you, and I'm curious about how it all started to you. How did you find this passion or even this wish to care about those topics? How did it all start for you?
Well, it started about more than 20 years ago. I met my my Danish husband to be, and at that time I wasn't sure that I wanted to be a parent.
Wow.
Because the thought of parenting terrified me. And so I really was just, the thought of motherhood was really, really scary. And then I met my Danish husband and we went to Denmark, and I saw the children in Denmark, and I immediately noticed they seemed really happy. They seemed really serene and calm. They were super well behaved, respectful. And I noticed this for a long time. And I said to my husband that if I could get a guarantee that I could have a Danish child, then maybe motherhood is a possibility. So, but for many years, I was, I'm a cultural researcher, and I was very interested in the Danish culture in general because it was my, what I married into. And I particularly became interested in the parenting because I knew something was different. And I lived in many different countries. So I really saw the different cultural ways of doing things. And so then when I had my first child, which was 7 years later, that's when I really understood that, I read a lot of books about parenting. I am a psychologist by background, but I always preferred the Danish way advice to any book I had read. And so this was happening for years, also after my second child. And I had become almost like, I've got to find a good word for it. It wasn't my religion, but like I believed that the Danish way was really working for me as a parent, but also for me as a person. So I felt happier, I felt better, I felt like it made more sense for me. So then one day I read in the newspaper that Denmark had been voted as the happiest country in the world. And as an American, I was really like shocked because we are obsessed with happiness. And then I found out that Denmark was the happiest country in the world for over 40 years in a row.
Wow.
So this year they're number 2, but they're always in the top 3. And I had like a eureka moment, a light bulb went off in my head, and I thought, oh my gosh, this must be tied to the parenting, because happy kids become happy parents who raise happy kids. And for me, it was just like it had changed me so much as a parent and a person who did not want children. I thought if this can help me, it can help anybody. And so that's how the book was born.
What's fascinating is that you are not Danish yourself, but you wrote a book on Danish way of parenting, not an American way of parenting, but so you are like this fierce advocate for, well, you married into that country, but still that wasn't your country at the beginning. And then you were so transform yourself, I would say, that even gave you this courage to become a mom. And then you wrote a book about it. That's fascinating.
Yes. And I think because I lived in different countries, and I saw, I already studied cultures, but when I saw how, when it came to parenting, every culture has certain ways that they believe are the right way to do things, right? And it's such a part of us that we don't even realize it. And it was like, when I was able to step out of being American and understand all the ways that being American affected how I thought about parenting, that's when I was able to look at different ways and understand if there was something I wanted to change. Because in Italy, they have these ways that like, this is the right way. You give your child olive oil and Parmesan and pasta, and in Norway, you leave your baby in -20 degrees to sleep. There was all these different ways, and that's when I was like, oh wow, what does it mean to be American? And I was able to like look at I call them default settings. So it's like if you look at a computer, what it's programmed with, that's what we all have. You're Lithuanian. So Lithuanians have many ways that are programmed from the culture. So I think it's really interesting, and that's the first chapters, is to take a minute and consider, why do I believe what I believe? And how much of this is coming, not just from my upbringing, because that's also really important, like what my parents did and stuff, but what did my culture ingrain in me? And then you can say, okay, am I interested in doing anything different? Or is there, of course, there's things we like, things we don't like, but I think it's a really powerful place to start, to consider these things.
It resonates with me so deeply because I first discovered my own cultural biases, I would say, about parenthood when I was living in Paris. I lived there for almost 15 years. And when I became a mom and I saw other people becoming moms, French moms, I was like, oh my gosh, because we do things differently. And then I just discovered that, so I have all those beliefs about parenthood that I didn't even, wasn't aware of them. They just lived inside me, and just becoming a man, like, show it all to me. So it for me, this stepping back happened because I guess I was living in Paris. It was easier to see the difference.
Yes.
If you stay in the culture, it might be really difficult to step back and to see, all those underground beliefs that you have about parenthood.
Yes, and that's why I think another reason why I wrote the book was sort of to help people who didn't live in other countries to have that opportunity to be able to understand and to have this experience. I call it the paradigm shift. That ability to see things from another way. Because again, I think there's many things that we don't want to change, but there's always a couple of things. And I say, take one or two, because if you take too many, you put too much pressure on yourself, right? But if you take one or two big things and you think, okay, this I would like to change for the next generation. And it's much harder to do than you realize, because again, when we're stressed, when we're tired, like parenting makes you, we return to our default settings. So we return to what we were programmed with. So it's like, it really helps to sort of focus on one or two things and like how you work on those. Okay,
so let's dive in. So what's so special about this Danish way of parenting? I'm just gonna tell one short story. So during spring break, we went to Legoland in Denmark. And so we had a very sunny morning. And then in the afternoon, it started raining. And we were queuing in the line, not that many people, but still like a little line. And then we queuing in the line, and in front of us, there was a family. And I would guess that was a Danish family, because I said to them, such a pity it's raining, it could be, we could have this sunny morning, and it would be so nice to have a sunny afternoon. And this lady, she looked at me smiling, and she said, yes, but we did have a sunny morning. How beautiful it is. And I was like, yeah, what?
Did you think about the book when you heard that?
I guess it's about.
I told you. That's very the Danish way.
Danish, right?
Yep.
All the other people in the line were like, I guess, blaming weather, because this lady was like, we had this morning, right? We did have it. It's such a we are happy to have this morning. I was like, yeah, sure. I'm like, what?
That's reframing.
That's reframing. That's what I thought. I was like, oh, so yeah, that's how it looks in real life.
Yeah. That's one of the tenets of the Danish way of parenting. There's six main tenets, and it's under the acronym of PARENT. So it's play, authenticity, reframing, empathy, no ultimatums, and togetherness and Hygge. I don't know if you want to. I don't know if we have time to cover all of them, but that what you just gave the example is a really, really powerful one, and that is basically this idea that Danes are extremely good at finding the positive details in what can seem like a negative situation. So it's not being like overly optimistic, like Americans can be sort of, like everything is awesome. And that's totally exaggerated and a bit fake. Whereas Danes are not, they're not denying that it's raining. They're just very good at pointing out that it was also sunny this morning. Or, the one of a famous Danish saying is, there's no bad weather. There's only bad clothing. Right. And they teach this to their kids, and their kids grow up to do this naturally. So what's powerful about it is that when a lot of the research, and this is, also in the book, you find that how we describe things scientific, like on a mental level, affects the way we feel about things. So the more we learn to reprogram our language and we reprogram what we focus on, we on a neurological level change the negative signals in our brain. We change how we feel. So it genuinely has an effect on our well-being. And it's really powerful with kids because, for example, another thing that they do in Denmark is they try to avoid, you almost never hear them using negative labeling for children. So like, he's so aggressive, he's so annoying, she's so bossy. They'll find the more positive storyline for that child. And I'll give a good example of a language example that was something I noticed when I was doing research for the book. I always saw this, the way that parents interacted with toddlers was, to me, very different than I saw in other countries. So it was much calmer, there was less yelling, you didn't hear these tantrums like you did other places. And then I was listening and I heard, they don't call that age, in English, we call it the terrible twos, right? Or the terrible threes, or, so they have this, you expect them to be terrible. You call them terrible, right? In Denmark, they call it the boundary pushing age or the independence age. And it's actually seen as almost healthy. It's cute. It's a normal part of their development. And just this change of language around how they see, it changes the way you react or respond to a child. And this can be done in so many ways of how we, how we, like a lot of us have habits of our language becomes a habit. And many times we think, oh, he's so annoying, or he's so, she's so bossy. Some of the language that we use, it's actually, we want our child to change their behavior. But when the child hears over and over again, my mom thinks I'm like this, my teacher thinks I'm like this, I must be like this. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy rather than, helping them build other ways to see themselves. So, so a distracted child may be a very artistic, very empathic child, so it doesn't mean you have to completely say the opposite. You just find, because everybody's good at something. And so you help them build up this other, this other self-image rather than focusing on the negative one, which can become very big. And I always ask adults, if you think even today, the kind of labels you have for yourself, the kind of limitations you have from yourself, you will find that they come from your childhood.
It's like
most of the time.
Sorry, it's like this glass, like if we see it half empty or half full, it's the same glass, the same amount of water in it, but when the way we see it, it's so different, and how we qualify it and how we see it and how we feel afterwards. If my glass is half empty, I'm feeling almost thirsty. If my glass is half full, I'm like, oh, I have all the time in the world because I still have water. And I was thinking, when you talked about was terrible twos or terrible threes, I was thinking about, the small chicken trying to come out of his eggshell. And we can call it like, oh, he's such a rebel, like, what is he doing? He could stay inside, and then we try to repress it. Or we could say, what a courage, and what I don't know, determination. And he's so eager to come out and then live his life on his own. And then it changes the perspective. We don't see it the same way, the same with the children. If we see them as pushing boundaries, but just to know what's right, what's wrong for him, it's one thing. If we see him as, he just want to get on my nerves and then do something against me, that's a very different reaction he's going to have from me. And it's easier when children live in that way from they are very, very young. But what to do for us adults when we didn't grow up in this environment? Who was trying to reframe things in a positive way, like yourself. How much time did it take for yourself to start reframing things as an adult? Because you didn't have it as a child, I suppose.
No, and I often say in my talks that reframing is the tenet of the Danish way of parenting that probably changed me the most as a person. And I work on reframing every single day. For me, it's a process that I will work on for my whole life, because I was not raised with reframers. I was not raised with this, and many of us were not. I'm not Danish, so for example, I was just home visiting my parents, and I really have to work extra hard when I'm back in my family, environment, and they work on it now as well. But yeah, just to say that it's something that I'm always aware of, and I try to hear my own thoughts, and try to work on hearing my thoughts and making sure that I stay on top of it, because I know how powerful it is. I know how much better I feel. I know how much nicer I am when I work on this becoming a skill. Now, I'm much better at it now. And the good news is that it is a skill which you can learn and you do get better at. And I truly think it's totally life-changing. Again, not just for you, but then for your children. Mm. And the great thing is that although it's a lot of work for us, it will be much more natural for our kids. Because they
yes, please finish.
No, because they, they will grow. I mean, even now, because my daughter has become more used to me being a reframer. if I go back to my default settings, she corrects me.
Wow.
Yeah, that's great. That's really nice. Because it really is so often how we choose to see the situation, how we choose to see ourselves, how we choose to see our children. And like I said, it's like a muscle. The more you build it up, the better you are at it. And it's just so profoundly life-changing that it's yeah, I recommend it for anybody, not just parents, but anybody.
So how do we start doing that? Like, let's say, so I decide, okay, I want to be a reframer myself. I want to start looking for small details that are present, just that I don't see them, and I want to emphasize them. So where do I start?
Well, okay, so this would also tie to, so reframing is the R in parent, and then the E is empathy. So empathy, so Denmark is one of the most empathic countries in the world as well. And empathy and happiness they're hand in hand. They're very tied together. So empathy helps your most meaningful relationships. It works on the same pathways as forgiveness, neural pathways as forgiveness. It's just hugely important in well-being and our relationships. And we know that our relationships are the biggest factor in well-being. Like I don't know if you heard, they did this, one of the longest running studies ever at Harvard, where they followed, have you seen this? Yeah, and the number one predictor in the longest running, study is our relationships for happiness. So empathy and reframing also go hand in hand. And one of the things that we talk about in the empathy chapter is to be aware also of how empathic you are. That means, how good am I at putting myself in someone else's shoes, in seeing through someone else's eyes, in hearing what someone else sees. Many people think they're very empathic, but many of us didn't grow up with super empathic situations. Because, for example, I mean, in America, it's one of the most individualistic countries in the world. So, that's just by nature, nobody's fault, but it's just naturally the culture does not aim for empathy being the number one, right, factor. And empathy, like reframing, is also a skill. So we are all born with the wires to connect to each other, to have human interaction, but we have to learn to connect the wires. And in Denmark, schooling and parenting, it's all very focused on making sure that we learn to think about other people, not just ourselves, right? Which is a skill. So I mentioned that because in terms of reframing, so one of the first things that is important to do is to start hearing how you talk about other people, how you talk about yourself. Am I being nice, or am I being judgmental? How am I talking about my family? How am I talking about my immediate family? How am I talking about my kids? How am I talking about my partner? The first step is to just start hearing yourself. That's really self-awareness. Nothing can happen until you're self-aware. There's a lot of people that just cannot be self-aware, and like, if you can't be self-aware, it's very difficult to be really empathic and reframe. So the first step is to be honest and to just start listening. How am I talking about my children's friends? Are they annoying and mean when something happens? Or am I trying to understand, like, oh, they're probably really tired. Maybe he didn't get his snack. I remember the other day when my child played really nicely with this child. Are you like, there's so many factors to this, but the first is almost like collecting information. How negative am I? Am I looking at my situation? I'm going, right? Is it all, so, is it dark and negative? And so it's, I would say the first step is collecting the information about yourself. And then a really interesting exercise, I think, which I do now on a daily basis. I really try not to judge. So that means, if somebody, you have a work situation and you immediately think, oh, well, that was rude, or she was, I'm like, whoa, no, and I try to stay out of judgment. I try to stay out of judgment of other people and of myself. And already this will have an effect on your life. Already this, you will be less hard on yourself. You will be less hard on your kids. You will find that will in itself start to make you feel lighter. If you're a perfectionist, for example, one of the best cures to perfectionism is to start judging everybody, including yourself, less. And this just becomes a much more natural thing to do. So you become nicer, like it's a skill, and it's a challenge, but in order to reframe how you see people, you also need to use empathy. Because even with your child, if you feel your child is, if you feel your child is being, what's like, I don't know, I'm looking for better words than annoying, but the more you practice trying to see, like, their behavior in a different way, or try to just understand the meaning behind their emotion and help connect with the meaning, rather than say, stop being like that, but connect and say, I see you're mad. I see you're mad, and trying to sort of connect and have empathy. All of these things will have a direct effect on your relationship with your child. And all of this starts with your relationship with yourself. So if you can start to improve your relationship with yourself and with others, that will just automatically have a better an effect on the relationship with your child.
I don't remember who said this, but the sentence was, the life we see and the life we live is not the true life, it's just the life we experience. That means that the way we see and describe life with words, that's what we're going to experience. That doesn't mean that the life is that way. It just means that our life, as we perceive it, is that way because we use certain words to describe it. So if I describe life as being difficult, challenging, upsetting all the time, that's going to be the life I'm going to live because that's how I define it. That's how I perceive it. Same for children, I guess. If I see my children as, bossy, lazy, crazy, very high, I don't know, active, whatever they are described in my words, that's how I'm going to perceive them. And I'm going to be, I guess, unhappy as a mom all the time because it's such a struggle to live with both kids as my words describe them. But I could choose, as you say, to try and describe my children differently, not to deny what they are, not to say, oh, we are not lazy, we are super, I don't know, productive, not to go into those lands and kind of lying to myself, but just to find what's behind it, what's good in it for my child and for myself, and what's behind the behavior. If I take the behavior as a communication, that doesn't mean that my child is his behavior. But that doesn't come naturally. That's difficult to do.
Oh my God, it's so difficult. And it's especially difficult when your culture and your family that you grow up in is different. It has been very negative, or has focused on the risks or the negative labeling and stuff like that. So that's forever going to be your default setting. So no matter how much work you do on yourself, whenever you're pushed to that point where you have no surplus and when you're really tired, you will return to your factory settings. But the more you practice being aware of that, and the more you practice understanding that many of the voices that you have in your head, or many of the choices you make for the language you use, is coming from how you were programmed. And you know that I can reprogram this. And the more that I do it, and the more that I work on it, the more natural it becomes. And slowly over time, it does start to it will never be your default setting, but it starts to become take up a much bigger place there. And again, and you'll feel how good that is and how powerful it is, because it's amazing when you realize, wow, just by changing my habit on how I'm describing some things, I really feel better. And my life starts to feel better. It's like you were saying before, the words we use really do become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you see it always as negative, it's always going to be negative. If you see it as limiting, if you see your child as, lazy and some of the other words you use, if you constantly think that and see that, guess what? They will be that.
Mm.
And things like laziness, I talk about this in the book as well. Something like laziness, or I'm trying to think of another good example. That's not a character trait.
Mm.
So you can be struck by bouts of laziness, but it's not who you are. And I think this is also really an important thing to separate these limiting beliefs about ourselves, right? You can be struck by moments of messiness. That doesn't mean you're a messy person, And this is also really important for your child and for your children's friends, because as they get older, you often have to help them resolve issues with their friends. And I've had it many times where I had to remind, let's say my daughter in this case, that it wasn't that I didn't like her friend. And it wasn't that I thought her friend was a bad person or a liar, but there was some bad behavior that she had engaged in that I didn't like. I like her friend. She's a really sweet, smart, super nice girl. And she had a tough background, right? Which I also tried to explain. Like that also affects how we behave, what's happening at home. But there was some behavior that I didn't like. And I think it's important that your child also knows that you separate the bad behaviors that we all engage in. That doesn't make you a bad person. That just makes you human. And again, this is practice for how we help our children, but it's also for us. I may have a day where I am feeling really lazy. And I may have a day where I don't feel like cleaning up the kitchen and that does not make me a bad mom. That makes me just, you know what? I'm going to go easy on myself and not judge. And this way I'm going to be also, I'm going to be nicer to myself, but this is going to make you nicer to your kids as well. I know that tomorrow I'll be organized, hardworking woman again.
And I also noticed that when I am hungry, tired, angry, I didn't sleep enough, I do go back, obviously, as all of us do, to, as you said, factory settings. But I also noticed that as years sum up, somehow, I don't go back straightly to a factory settings. Now I regress, but I know like, oh, so I'm 3 updates behind, because you have this factory version. And when you kind of get updates somehow, if you was someone who judged like other people all the time, maybe you still have this tendency of judging them, but you don't blame them anymore.
Yes.
So the first update, when there's the second update coming about something else. So I still lose updates. I know that, I feel that.
Right.
But then I also feel that after some time, I don't go back to the factory.
Yes. I call that like factory settings 2.0. So like I'm on Jessica 3.0 right now.
Yes.
So yes, you're right. So you do that. When you do work on it, it does evolve the fact, which is wonderful.
Another thing I wanna discuss with you is how Danish school works, because I read some of your articles too, and I loved this thing at school. I don't remember the name, where so first of all, there's the system where we put differently skilled kids at the same table and they help each other at school. So that already at school, that shows that first, maybe, I don't know, at math, you have a strong one, not that strong, but then we change the subject and it's geography, and suddenly I'm the one who's explaining to you something. And we kind of see that our strengths and skills change according to a certain life situation. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that's actually a little bit about when I wrote for this paper for Berkley. It's a little bit around this. So there's a concept in Danish which is called fællesskab, and basically it means how do you describe a fællesskab? It's how well the group gets along. And because it's not like in America, as I said, it's much more individual. So they think much more about like my grades, my homework, my test scores, my success. There's very little, if any, focus on our success. And it's interesting because if you think about anything you do in life, it's usually in some kind of team. I mean, the best work is usually teamwork, because everybody has different skills that they can bring to a project. And yet again, if you look at American movies, we usually celebrate like it was one person. It's always the hero. You know, forget about the 50 people that it took to get this person, right? And whereas in Denmark, there's much more focus on the team. And the reality is as I said, we're all different, good at different things. So you may be a math genius, but you may struggle on the soccer field. So what they try to do is to make sure that like part of their learning in school, the learning also comes from the kids. So if you're good in math, the teachers have lesson planning where they make sure that the strong one in math sits next to the weak one in math, sometimes to make sure that they help. And we know that you learn more when you have to teach others. So part of the teaching for the child is also teaching someone else, which is also teaching empathy, because that child needs to be able to understand how their classmate is receiving the information in order to teach, right? So this is just naturally learning how to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And similarly on the football field, so that child that's maybe struggling in math then learns, oh, well, on the soccer field, on the football field, I'm helpful because I'm really good at playing football, you know? And I would say about 60% of their work in schools is group work.
Wow.
Yeah. And they don't get grades till much later because they don't like the competition of grades. And they want them to focus on many other skills than just academics. So it's a lot about collaboration. It's a lot about putting them in different situations where everybody's skills can shine. That means you may be, you know, I just saw something the other day that said, every time this teacher had seen someone that was considered a troublemaker, when they took them outside into nature to do things, they almost always became a leader.
Wow.
So it's like this whole body experience. It's like we have fit kids into a classroom at a desk, and it's just so unnatural for so many kids. And so many kids they don't like taking tests, and yet it's the only gauge we have to find out if you're good. And so the more that we open this up, in Denmark, it's already been, there's so many different ways that you can shine. And this really, I think, you know, I never considered it before I started studying the Danish way, because I grew up in this very academic, you know, get good grades, get good test scores. But when you start to realize that, you know, there's so many different ways to be a leader, or maybe someone's good at cooking or gardening, or right, but that's not prized, you know. But things are changing because the world is changing, technology, all of this stuff, and what kids need is now really it's going to start changing, I think, and I hope it's going to be for the best, because I think we lose a lot of kids in these limited systems, you know. And also, just I'll add this last thing in terms of parenting, because in our culture we have prized education so much and academics in so many places. That's another place we have missed opportunities to build up our children's self-esteem and self-confidence, because things like empathy or being kind or working well together, in Denmark, they are truly as important as academics. Danes think it's strange that we over program our kids' lives to learn math at 3, or, you know, how fast can my child learn to read? They think it's so strange because they feel there's so many things to develop in a child, like empathy, like kindness, like nature, you know, and this for parents, I think, is a wonderful place where, especially when our kids are younger, if we begin to have a paradigm shift, we can really help build up their self-esteem and self-confidence in themselves, which is fundamentally the real base for success. You know, if you have a strong base where you feel like valued as a person and you feel good about yourself regardless, then whether you get a good grade or a bad grade or a success or a failure, the idea is that you will keep going. And I think that's for sure, we know much more of the determinant of success than getting perfect grades.
That's so true. But somehow we say that we value that, but when someone is being kind, we just take it for granted. Like, well, that's normal. That's how you should be. When someone gets home with an A, we're like, yeah, yeah, that's something. Let's celebrate it. Let's celebrate it. So it's difficult to, again, as you say, it's difficult to have this paradigm shift, because we have values. And I guess if we were asked as parents, like, what do we wish for our children? We would all say, like, I wish them to be happy. I guess that's the main thing. I just want them to be happy, to do things that they want to do in life, to feel fulfilled, to feel happy. And yet we focus on so many different other things, like through this childhood, like grades, behavior, evaluation, and all the other stuff that don't necessarily make them happy, that make them miserable half of the time, if not more. So it's not easy to be aware, as you said earlier. It takes effort. It doesn't come naturally to just be aware what we value, and does my actions are in accordance with what I value, how I describe life, and is this life how I want to live? And do I want to really believe that about life, or my children, or my partner, or myself? But it doesn't come naturally. Yes, it's hard.
I come from the family that was the complete opposite. And I don't think it's not about, I'm not trying to be Danish. I'm not changing everything. I understand, like, I've taken on board how important a lot of these things are for making a more well-rounded child. And I don't think it's not about changing everything. It's like, okay, I see that. I think that's really interesting. I'm going to try to implement some of it. Like, we can't change the culture we live in. We can't change many things, but some things we can have an effect on. It doesn't mean you don't still want your child to get good grades and you hope for them to be, successful in certain terms. Like, I understand that, but you can focus much more on making sure they also know that no matter what happens, you do value them for who they are. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. That's the most important thing, I guess, that our children should know that we couldn't love them more or less. I like both. Like, whatever you do, whatever your achievements, I wouldn't love you more, because that means that I love you already that much that I can. And then whatever your behavior in those moments, I couldn't love you less. Again, because there's nothing you could do that would make me love you more or less. That's a very secure place to grow up, I guess.
Yes, and that's why I think, and I don't think we'll have time to talk about Hygge, but in one of a huge Danish pillar, let's say, of parenting is this idea of Hygge, which is a very Danish word. It's, if you haven't heard of it, like, Google it. It went into the English dictionary in 2016.
Really?
Yeah. I once thought, because Hygge became so popular, that I was like, maybe I should have called it the Hygge way of parenting. So Hygge is a very Danish word. It's a big part of their culture, and it's basically cozy times with people you care about. And it's a whole thing, but they prize Hygge so much, and it's really about creating these moments where you appreciate just being together, rather than focusing on things to do, things to achieve, complaining, negativity. It's very much like a team effort. You try super to be in the moment and focus on the good stuff, and focus on being there. And this is true for families, this is true for friends, but I focus a lot on families because I think it starts there. But Hygge is completely life-changing. My American family is like, we are totally different because of learning about Hygge. And I was just there for Easter, and I cannot even believe how much better my family operates because of it. I made something called, if I have it here. Oh yeah, hold on. Oh, I have it in Italian. I have it in English as well. It's called the Hygge Oath. And you can actually get it on the website on the danishway.com. It's called the Hygge Oath. And it tells you sort of what you can do to create Hygge. And it's things like turn off the phones for a period, you know, it's just for a period of time. It's not for, you know, not forever. It's just for a dinner or for an hour in the evening, or you decide. I don't want to read the Italian one, but it's like leave some of your, you know, leave all your problems outside. Light candles. Candles are very cozy. Appreciate the food. Tell and retell nice stories about your past. Kids love to hear nice stories about growing up. And every family, I mean, unless it's a really extreme case, every family has nice stories to tell about when you were growing up. It's just that a lot of families get into the habit of complaining. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, oh, remember when we took that trip to, you know, and the reason that that's really Hygge is because it puts you in the same nice mindset together. So Hygge is very much, it's we time, it's not me time. So for this moment, I'm focusing on the we and not on myself and all the things I have to do and all the things I have to, you know, it's not about, Hygge's time is not about what you've accomplished. It's not about all of your problems. It's like an oasis where you can just be together. And one of the ways I describe it, which I feel people, it resonates a bit more, is you've probably heard of mindfulness. Okay, so mindfulness we know is super tied to well-being. Everybody's trying to do meditation, and it's like the more you can be present in the moment and forget your thoughts and forget that this creates a sense of well-being. So Hygge, in my opinion, is the evolution of mindfulness. And it's not mindfulness, it's we-fulness. So it's being present in the moment with the people you care about and being in that sort of space, leaving all the other stuff out. And it is so nice for kids because they love being with their families in a drama-free, no negativity space. They absolutely love it. And again, if you do it, it's hard, it's hard, it's work. It's like reframing, it's a bit of work, but the more we do it, the more natural it becomes for them. And it's, I mean, I can't, that's such a nice legacy, I think, to leave for families, that you can be together in these space, like no, for example, my family now in America, we were like, no controversial discussions, no political discussions for this dinner, you know, for this period of time. And you just can't believe what a difference it makes. So a lot of parents, they print this out, they put it on their refrigerator because it's a team effort. Everybody has to do it, you know? So it's a little bit of something to discuss. And singing is very Hygge. So that's something you can do with your child. And the more time you have to just Hygge together, to have these cozy moments, the more your child feels loved for who I am. Right? Because in the Hygge space, nobody cares whether you're having a great time or a terrible time. This is where we come together to respect our being together.
It's like resting in each other's presence, right? Just, you don't have to be anyone. You just go there and you feel fully accepted and you fully accept other people. And we all just rest into each other's company. Yes.
Yes. It's when it works, it's recharging for the soul and heart. It sounds really simple, but it's
I know. Nothing is simple about that. But let's make it sound simple.
try it. Try it. Like the reframing, it takes practice.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Just tell us, where can people find you?
So you can go to thedanishway.com, and I'm Jessica Joelle Alexander on Instagram, or the Danish Way Facebook. And yeah, if anybody has questions, feel free to reach out to me. And yeah, hopefully everybody can try a little hygge.
Thank you very much, and I really hope we could all try this hygge and see how it works. Thank you for your time, and thank you for everything you shared so generously with us. And I'm gonna see all of you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.